government fails, the world's off its rails, leaders are whacked, democracy is under attack. It's time to get smart, folks, time to get real. Let's cut through the crap, tell us how you feel. Let's cue the talent, let's meet the host. Podcast by George.
Hello, hi, how are you? Welcome back to Podcast by George. We've got the doc. It's time for a house call. Dr. Steffen W. Schmidt, the Lucan Endowed Professor of Political Science from Iowa State University. The dude's dedicated 50 years of his life teaching the world really about American politics and teaching America about Iowa politics. And now he's a guest on Podcast by George. We're happy to have him back, and there's so much going on each and every day. We swap emails once in a while. It's like, my God, we could do this almost every day with what's transpiring. And I wanted to maybe start today by explaining something. You know, when I named the podcast a year and a half ago, I don't know if it was a stroke of genius or not, but a lot of people like it. Podcast by George, they like the title. But in retrospect, if I was going to name this podcast again, I would name it House of Mirrors, because that seems like the world that we're living in. Each and every day the news comes down the pike and I look at it and I go, my God, everything is the opposite of the way that it should be. Everything seems to be in reverse. And I made a quick little list here to get us started. Maybe some of these things we can talk about with the doc, and I know he's got some things on his mind as well. But I'll give you just three quick hitters. Three's a good number. Here are three things that are top of my list for the House of Mirrors. And you've heard me talk about the first one often, and it's that CARES Act. Now, here's the biggest trickle-down program in the history of the United States, maybe since the pharaohs of old Egypt. I mean, all of this upward movement of wealth in the United States, this is our solution. This is our means of dealing with the greatest existential crisis, the COVID-19 epidemic, maybe Donald Trump also, that we've ever faced in this country. And it's supported unanimously by the Democratic Party, which is, well, almost unanimously by the Democratic Party, staked its claim. Really what it stands for is opposition to trickle-down economics, going back to the Reagan era. And so the CARES Act, House of Mirrors, number one. Number two, Bernie Sanders just comes out of hiding, basically. He's retired to the basement, kind of like Joe Biden during the pandemic, to do a talk show. He spits the bit in horse racing terminology as far as the presidential election is concerned, endorses his good friend and fellow Senator Joe Biden, and comes out with task forces, which, I mean, you could almost laugh out loud. Again, with these existential threats facing the world, possible extinction of human life as we know it. Bernie Sanders comes out, the man of action, Bernie Sanders, the revolutionary, America's Che Guevara, America's Castro. He comes out with task forces, and Joe Biden says, well, I'll take those under advisement. And so, as you can see, that's my mirror number two. And then mirror number three, and Doc and I talked about this a little bit, and I want to get his take on it here sometime during this conversation. And it has to do with these Afghanistan bounties. And it's, my God, after almost 20 years, that's right, 20 years in Afghanistan, the Afghan war gets a gold watch next year, 20 years that we've been there. It looks like some progress is being made with the Taliban to get us the hell out of there. And what happens? The Democrats join with the Republicans to stop, of all people, Donald Trump from pulling us out of Afghanistan. I look at that and say, God, that is mirror number three. So anyway, let's welcome in our good buddy, our good pal. He's taking on I saw in the preview in the run-up, he's taking on the casual look here. Steffen W. Schmidt. Good morning, Doc.
Good morning. I just, as you said, it's not even worth taking a shower or combing your hair. Why? I'm not seeing anybody. I'm not going out there, with all the kids that are up at the Iowa Great Lakes partying with their friends on their boats. No social distancing, no masks. nothing, just a lot of booze and a good time. And so it's discouraging, frankly. I mean, I have to tell you, I am discouraged. I am not optimistic. I am discouraged. I think, it is, the rot starts from the head down when you catch a fish and you leave it on the dock too long. And the rot starts from the top in a country when your president, is distracted by 1,000 different things, cannot concentrate on number 1, 2, and 3, which is we have 3 issues that are destroying this country. The COVID virus that came along is the biggest, I think, threat maybe ever in American history. And it has produced, I think, these other side effects. Obviously, the economy is in horrible shape. And then you have the police misbehaving and triggering a basically compressed, explosive fear, anger in the Black community, in the minority community. And now with video showing every guy that's beaten or shot under circumstances that, seem unacceptable to almost every American. I mean, even if you're a conservative Republican, you've got to say, this is not the way the police is supposed to treat people, even if people are misbehaving and passing, a fake $20 bill or, not behaving the way they should. You don't kill them. And we don't seem to be able to concentrate on those 3 things. And so instead, we've got all this politics as normal going on in a way, and it's not going to get us across the finish line. So, I think the way things are tense, people are worried, they're waiting in lines for hours, sometimes days, to get a test, and then the test results can't be reported for another week sometimes. So why bother to take a test? The purpose of testing for coronavirus is you tested positive, so go isolate yourself at home. It should be an instant result. To then put a week later to tell a person, yeah, you tested positive. That person has been out there for a week going to Hy-Vee and going to, grocery stores and visiting with friends and maybe eating out. It's useless. And so I think we may be at the edge of potential revolution. And I showed you earlier, I'm wearing my T-shirt here that I bought, and people don't know this guy, but his name is Che Guevara.
Yeah.
And he's no longer with us. U.S. Special Forces took care of him in Bolivia, but he was an Argentine doctor, not well in terms of his health, but a person who kind of believed in social justice, believed that there should be social change and economic change. And he traveled on his motorcycle from Argentina up through the Americas, eventually ended up connecting with another fellow that most people have forgotten about. His name is Fidel Castro in Mexico. And they got on board this Chris Craft boat that Castro bought in Mexico called
I remember,
Grandma.
yeah. Nice boats, yeah.
Grandma, yeah. I visited Grandma in Havana.
Wow.
We went to Havana on a State Department approved trip. And Grandma, the boat that landed the Cubans the revolutionaries in Cuba, is at the Museum of the Revolution in Havana. And you can walk up on this walkway around it and look inside Grandma. And Che Guevara joined the revolution. And eventually when Castro was well in power, Castro said, why don't you go to Africa? They need some revolutions there. And he went to, I think, Namibia and some other places and tried to start up some revolutions. And it didn't work too well. He didn't speak their language. He wasn't Black. And so eventually he said, well, I'm going to go back closer to home. And he went to Argentina and then snuck into Bolivia and tried to get the Bolivian native Bolivians, Aymaras and others, to start a revolution. And the U.S. military helped the Bolivian government corner him. They killed him. They buried him in an unmarked grave there in Bolivia so that he wouldn't become a martyr. But Che Guevara was part of something that was happening in those days, which was the late 50s, early 60s, which was a lot of unrest and a lot of unhappiness and poverty, class division, the rich versus the poor in countries all over the place. And when you look at the U.S. today, the difference in income between the highest level of the 1% or 0.5%, and the vast majority of Americans, when I teach my classes, I tell my students, this is not safe. This is not something that, is okay. It can lead to eventually to tremendous social unrest and basically violence. And why we're not addressing that plus all the other issues, I don't know.
Well, we're going to have to address some of this very quickly, and it's a result of this CARES Act, the upward movement to the oligarchs that we talked about with all of the revenue, hoping that it'll trickle down on some of us, which it never does. One of the very few benefits that came from that was a little stipend, a $600 unemployment check for people thrown out of work because of the pandemic. Well, that is going to expire. That's coming up in 2 weeks, and the Senate isn't even in session. And of course, when those people don't have that, that's how they're getting by. That's how they're literally probably eating, but it's certainly how they're making their mortgage payments, their rent, their car payments, and that type of thing. If they don't act on that, things are going to get real hairy real quick. And of course, before the pandemic, 30 million Americans were without health care under Obamacare. And now, with everyone out of work and having employer-sponsored insurance, that number is probably doubled. So when those people start getting sick and have no means of getting treated, and most importantly, Doc, and I know you've observed these situations around the world, you talked about revolution, when people watch their kids getting hungry, when they see their kids getting sick, and my God, if they ever see their kids die because they can't get health care, that's when you see revolution. And we're not that far from it. Things could get hairy.
We are so blind to the fact because we think we're the richest country in the world. We have, quote, the best healthcare system in the world. And we are unwilling to accept the fact that we're not immune from what happens in other countries. When you let things deteriorate, when things become essentially so tilted in the wrong direction, it can explode. And I've even said to my students, I have a friend in Maine who writes these wonderful books about the different regions of America. He says they're not 50 states. They're like 11 regions, and they're all totally different from each other. The South, the former Confederacy, and New England, and so on. And I tell my students, when I see sometimes the differences between access to abortion, to healthcare, to good schools in different parts of the country, I tell them, it's possible that the United States may someday split up into several countries because some parts of the country, again, as in the Civil War, may not want to be part of the other part of the country. And that's a fear that I have. It's a fear that I have that with all this going on, parts of the country may just say, we can do better on our own. That's another fear that I have. And certainly the social inequality, the healthcare system that we are now discovering, George, is not the best in the world, is very vulnerable, is in some cases so fragmented and underfunded. We don't have enough nurses. We have a deficit of about 80,000 physicians, doctors. We bring doctors from other countries who graduate from their medical schools, and we used to attract them here. Now we have Steve Miller's immigration policy, which is we don't want all these foreigners here. Well, you watch TV sometime. Who are the doctors in Florida and other places who are running the intensive care units and the pandemic response? Many of them are from other countries. They have an accent. They came here. They were brought here. They love working here, and they are immigrants. And so, we just don't seem to have a handle on reality, is what I'm saying. We don't understand the reality of the United States. And what you mentioned, which is so many people who are going to suddenly be unemployed and not have the emergency income, I don't know what's going to happen with that. And at the same time, when you want to defund the police, it may be when that revolution breaks out, a lot of people are going to refund the police.
Well,
yeah, who knows?
Let's look at it this way. I hope that isn't ever the case. It reminded me of Bernie Sanders. So Bernie comes out with these task force. Here's the guy whose entire career, again, House of Mirrors, staked on Medicare for all. He comes out with these task forces. No Medicare for all. I looked at that like, my God, are you kidding me? That would be the one thing that you would think that we would need in a pandemic that would be recommended first and foremost. But no, maybe it's because they're going to Joe Biden. And he's already on the record saying that if the House and the Senate were to approve Medicare for all, he would veto it. Why would he veto it? Because of the corporatism of America, because of his donors. It's very simple. Because of the economics of it. He's very concerned about how much of our economy is based in the private insurance industry, and he doesn't want to melt it all down with Medicare for all. But by God, when it comes between that and dying, I'm going to take life every single time, at least personally, anyway. And I'm glad you mentioned Florida. I wanted to get back to that very quickly, Doc. I know that's very near and dear to your heart. You live there. Those healthcare workers that you're talking about down in Florida, they're getting sick. They're going to be unable to do their job. And we've got to be concerned and worried about that. There are a lot of these statistics having to do with COVID-19 that I'm alarmed about. We're getting more infections. The death rate is going up. Some of these states are in real trouble. And in Florida, they're the tip of the spear. What happens when those healthcare workers that you talked about can't take care of people because they themselves are sick?
Well, it's shocking to hear healthcare workers say, we've been told to wear the same covering, the same face mask over and over and over again. Yeah. So I'm treating a patient over here, and my mask and my outfit gets contaminated. In the past, we used to throw those away. Now they've got to wear them because there's a shortage. And yet we have Washington, D.C., and President Trump saying, oh, there's plenty of stuff. We have all the supplies we need. We have all the testing we need, and so on. And the reality every day is that we don't. So I guess what will happen is more people will die. That's what will happen if you don't have enough nurses, healthcare workers, ambulance drivers. In some places, you call an ambulance and it takes them 5 or 6 hours to come because a lot of them are sick. The system is overwhelmed. It's just really apocalyptic, I guess is the word I would use.
You can definitely go there. I have to think of my friend Dr. Andrew Nish. He said, stay positive. This is all linear. We're all connected. It's all part of quantum physics, basically. Stay positive and we shall overcome. But my God, it is hard to do it because, as you mentioned, the hospitals are being overrun. And you got to remember, a lot of these people aren't even going until it's too late. Some of them never go at all. They die at home. And the reason is they don't have health care insurance. They don't have any way to take care of themselves. They're afraid to go to the hospital because of ICE in some respects. They don't want to be discovered. They don't want their families deported. And so there's a lot of reason to be really concerned about that. Well, again, we always run short of time. We've got a little bit of time here. I wanted to get some quick hitters in here. And one of the first things, and it's what I mentioned earlier, I wanted to get your take on it because I looked at this Afghan bounty story and I saw a lot of the liberals in perspective taking great umbrage to this. I mean, they really wanted to, and you saw it reflected in the vote with the liberal Democrats joining with the Republicans to stay in there. I looked at that story and I thought, my God, that mostly was generated via the New York Times. And folks, I want to tell you something. When you look at these stories, I don't care if it's the New York Times or not. Look at the sourcing. Look at how thinly sourced some of these stories are. If they're quoting anonymous intelligence agency officials, no one is on the record. And if they're using these couched terms like probable and possible and all this isn't that hard to do. I looked at that and said, man, this is bullshit. I'm telling you, I can see through this. I'm just a guy in his office here in early retirement doing a podcast, and I can see through that. Well, since then, Colin Powell has come out and said basically the same thing. This Milley, the Marine general, has debunked it basically. Well, I mean, it reminds me of what you said earlier about how we're kind of losing it intellectually, or we're just not able to look at things critically any longer. And that, to me, that's a perfect example.
Well, it really is. And my first reaction when I saw the story initially was, well, the Taliban are out to kill American soldiers. You have to pay them. That's what they do for a living, right?
19 years.
Is their life. That's right. We've been there longer than any other war. They've been killing Americans since the day that we invaded Afghanistan. What? All of a sudden, somebody has to pay them to kill an American soldier?
It's crazy.
Give me a break. You know, we're not stupid.
Right, and why would Russia, an outside third party, need to pay that? We're in Afghanistan. It should be the Afghanistanis they're the ones wanting to kill us, folks. I mean, that was transparent.
It was, and it's really sad to see, as I think we talked earlier, Democrats wanting to stay in Afghanistan longer. You know, I remind people, John McCain said when it came up, he said, Afghanistan, we're going to be there for 100 years. You can look that up.
Yeah,
you can look it up. That's what he said. And so far we're up to 19, not 100 yet, but you know, it's a morass. If you read the history of Afghanistan, you'll see nobody has ever won a war there. The Afghans love their country. They're fierce. They don't mind if they die. You know, in Islam, martyrdom is actually an important thing. And, you know, we should have cleaned up the terrorist cells, you know, like we should have done in Vietnam. We won and gotten the heck out of there. There's a great article that a colleague of mine recommended that said, we can't even make enough face masks in this country. How can we do, you know, democracy in some place where there had never been one by invading it and trying to do regime change in countries all over the world? It hasn't succeeded. The only time it ever worked was when we invaded Germany and Japan and then stayed there, and they became basically democracies. But other than that, where have we succeeded? By going into a country that's an absolute mess, spending millions or billions of dollars. So, you know, can we overcome what Eisenhower called the military-industrial complex, which after World War II, they said, hey, the war is over. We still want to make money. So in order to build ships, airplanes, bombs, you know, weapons, we have to have wars somewhere. And we've done a great job. We've had wars all over the world, undeclared, in violation of the Constitution, which says basically that Congress shall declare war. And we've not used that because Congress often doesn't really want to declare a war. So we've given presidents all this authority to go in and fight, and with usually the end results, as in Vietnam and probably Iraq and Afghanistan, are going to be that after all that pain and suffering, death, destruction, and cost, we're going to leave and have not succeeded. That's just a sad story, isn't it?
Well, folks can look it up on the internet, or they can check it out in your book. I mean, and I want to get that mention in there. This guy, Steffen W. Schmidt, literally wrote the book. A lot of this is covered in there. I reference it often.
Yeah.
And if you're looking it up, I mean, you might look up that clip that he's talking about. Also look up Wesley Clark. I think maybe during one of his runs for the president, he not only identified the countries that we were going to be at war in, he identified them in the order. This was back at the turn of the century. And, Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Yemen, Somalia, Libya, Niger. The countries that were currently in the war, our special forces are in 70 countries around the world. I mean, we have the Middle East surrounded in more ways than one. And we can get into that maybe at some other time here as we wrap up this podcast. I did want to get to one other, to mention, so why would the New York Times and the media and the neolibs and all that support staying in Afghanistan? Well, a lot of this has to do, are they too dumb? Or are they in on it? If you're going to give them a break, you might say it's parochial view. Maybe some of these politicians, maybe some of these newspapers and media, they're just wanting to represent the views of their local businesses, many of which are tied to the defense industry. Maybe. I mean, that goes back to the casino thing. Maybe they're too dumb. Or the Casino, the movie. You've heard me talk about that before with that line by Robert De Niro. Or they're in on it. And that one sure as hell looked like they were in on it. I got to mention her, the one person on that Armed Services Committee that was not in on it, that voted against that restriction, Tulsi Gabbard. Yeah,
that's right.
Tulsi,
yeah.
But no, she couldn't be the nominee.
She's marginalized by the Democrats because that they have a tune and a narrative and a script, and you can't go off that. Never have. And I'm telling you, in case you're worried, I do plan to take a shower and shampoo my hair and shave the next time. But I wanted to show I don't know how many viewers you now have for the podcast, but it's a large and growing number, that life on a farm in Iowa during COVID is not very pleasant, and you become discouraged and you start looking like you're homeless.
Well, I had a podcast on that particularly, and some of the rural areas and the farmers are the hardest hit in some ways because they're used to dealing with a level of isolation. Always, they're somewhat better equipped to deal with it. But in other ways, when something like this happens, that moderate isolation that's kind of a way of life becomes extreme isolation, and the social consequences, a psychological impact of that are. I mean, things are going to get weird here. And remember, we're in the summertime. We're supposed to be in the good time as far as this thing is concerned. The fall and winter are coming. So, are you, Dr. Fauci, the pessimist? It's going to get worse. We're going to all die. Well, some of that's based on the Spanish flu and the pandemic of 1918. So, I mean, it's just based on historical precedent. But I think there's some scientific reason to believe that it probably is going to get worse unless we can mitigate it. I can't imagine, George, how it can get worse. Yeah. I cannot imagine how it can get worse. And they say that the regular flu, which is also a COVID virus, that comes every fall, we get the flu. We get our flu shots. It's going to also come. So you're going to have potentially the regular flu, the COVID. How are we going to be able to deal with that? I just pray that something will break through and that we will be able to see the light. All right, great. Well, that's a good way to end. Let's wrap it up there because we are out of time. Folks, that's Steffen W. Schmidt. He's the professor from Iowa State University, the Lucan Endowed Professor, a 50-year career of teaching people about American politics around the world in the state of Iowa, and now on a podcast by George, and we're just delighted to have him. Doc, thanks for coming back on. Thank you. And that's going to do it. That's going to wrap it up. If you like us, please like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and you can subscribe on YouTube and ring the notification bell so that you get each and every one. Doc talked about the growing popularity of the show, and it is working. I mean, it's catching on. We're up over the 10,000 download level. I had a download here just on Facebook alone. One of our podcasts that went over 5,000. No, I say that, but I also have to mention it was the one that I did on morel mushroom hunting. I don't know what it is, but it kind of went a little mini viral. Everybody loves morels, and they wanted to know what was happening because it was morel time in the state of Iowa. But just that one on Facebook alone got viewed over 5,000 times. So that's going to do it. That's going to wrap it up. We'll be back again soon. We'll be back with the doc soon. That's another podcast by George.